play it any louder, then it's getting shut down.
My name is Waffles, and I'm a government whistleblower turned political commentator, and this is the last 24 hours in the news. Today is October 26, 2025. It is 8:59 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Here are the top U.S. news highlights for the past 24 hours. East Wing demolition preservation suits filed. Photos and reporting showed the White House East Wing has been largely torn down as part of the president's privately funded ballroom project. At least one federal motion seeking an immediate injunction was filed by private plaintiffs, arguing required historic preservation and public review processes were bypassed. Developing court filings and emergency motions expected to move quick. Real quick before we move forward from this one, I would like to know what happened to the valuables that were inside of the East Wing of the White House. Somebody put up footage today of they went and visited the White House while Biden was in office. It was just, some historical preservation going on. Looked like there were some very valuable paintings and other artifacts in the East Wing when I was looking at that video. And with that said, I would also like to say that there was a person in the online chat rooms that I like to hang out in who had a few months ago been delivering pizza to one of Trump's locations. I think it was like his hotel or something. I don't know. He was at a building in New York. So I think that's the Trump hotel that was at. And he told me that he told the whole chat that there were Russians in the building. And it also looked like they were moving paintings around. They were loading paintings into the building. So I would like to know what happened to the artifacts in the East Wing. Judge, FEMA conditionality, we're going on with the news now. I just wanted to state that. FEMA conditionality violated prior court order, ongoing legal limit. A federal judge ruled earlier this month that the administration violated an order by again attaching immigration cooperation conditions to FEMA grant letters. That ruling remains a key constraint and a live legal avenue for states challenging conditionality. Congressional oversight and subpoenas continuing. House committees have stepped up document and testimony demands tied to enforcement and program rescissions. Oversight fights and potential subpoenas remain active. Court fights blocking Guard and federal troop deployments continue. Courts have kept restraining orders in place in several jurisdictions, including Chicago and Portland, and appeals and emergency filings remain active. There is no confirmed large-scale nationwide military deployment against U.S. citizens reported in the last 24 hours, but the legal disputes could trigger abrupt developments. Chicago immigration enforcement operations produced local backlash. High-visibility federal immigrant enforcement actions over the past few days produced detentions and heavy local scrutiny. Civil liberties groups and city officials are preparing challenges. Offshore strikes near Venezuela continue to draw legal and diplomatic scrutiny. UN human rights experts and members of Congress have demanded legal memos and briefings after U.S. maritime strikes. Oversight pressure and diplomatic complaints are active. White House funding freezes and program rescissions remain in effect. Earlier administrative freezes, including an $11 billion infrastructure pause and grant rescission, continue to threaten flood control, transit, energy efficiency, and other local projects with immediate risk to jobs and public safety projects in affected jurisdictions. Pentagon memo tightens staff communications with Congress, governance impact. An internal Pentagon memo dated October 15th, reported October 21st, now routes most staff communications through legislative affairs, raising transparency and oversight concerns, while military posture and domestic deployment oversight are hot topics. Aviation and travel vulnerability, unpaid safety staff. Reports warn 13,000 air traffic controllers and 50,000 TSA officers are working without pay during the shutdown. with officials warning of higher delays and cancellations if the impasse persists into peak travel periods. This is an immediate consumer service and logistics risk. Permitting and project delays continue. Shutdown-driven furloughs plus freezes on federal obligations are delaying permits, pausing award and contract actions, and straining contractors and local governments that depend on federal flows. Expect schedule and cost escalation for many local infrastructure jobs. CDC staffing upheaval remains a material vulnerability. Reports through mid-October show large RIF and layoff notices at the CDC. Hundreds to 1,000 affected, some rescinded. Public health leaders warn surveillance and surge response capacity are degraded while staffing stabilizes. No new nationwide outbreak reported in the last 24 hours, but capacity risk persists. Diplomatic fallout, maritime strikes, tariffs, and demolition optics. U.S. maritime strikes near Venezuela prompted international criticism and UN complaints. Tariff rhetoric and recent trade escalations continue to strain key partners. The White House East Wing demolition has also produced international surprise and comment given the symbolism of altering a national historic site. Legal action, specifically against the Trump administration, historic preservation litigation to pause East Wing work. Plaintiffs seek temporary relief to stop demolition pending review of preservation and permitting claims. Solar for all grant. No, I'm just reading that. I'm like, I think it's a little too late for that. Solar for all grant rescission suits and FEMA conditionality cases continue. Multiple states, counties, and NGOs have pending suits seeking to restore canceled clean energy grants and to enforce the FEMA conditionality order. Expect motions for injunctive relief shortly. White House East Wing reduced to rubble as ballroom project proceeds. Preservation lawsuits filed. The demolition and rapid legal filings have shocked many observers and prompted urgent litigation. UN human rights experts condemned the U.S. maritime strikes near Venezuela as potentially extrajudicial. This international rebuke is raising fast oversight and diplomatic pressure. President amplified AI-generated provocative content that demeaned protesters and political leaders. This is about the video that Trump was spreading, where it appears that he is flying an airplane and dropping feces on the American people. No new allegations of sexual misconduct. East Wing injunctions and guard deployment appeals emergency orders could produce immediate newsworthy rulings. The can't derailment for the train that just derailed. No updates on that yet. No information on when the shutdown is going to end. Air traffic controller shortages spike. 22 incidents reported, more delays expected. Shortage incidents are already producing flight delays and cancellations. During the shutdown, continued unpaid staff could disrupt travel and cargo movement. CSX coal train derailed into wetlands in Kent County, Virginia. Dozens of cars and 2 locomotives off track. Significant environmental impact to wetlands, rail traffic disruptions on a key corridor, and an active CSX agency investigation. Cause not yet publicly known. Photos confirm the White House East Wing has been largely demolished as part of a private-funded ballroom project. Unprecedented alteration of a national historic site, immediate preservation lawsuits, and urgent legal questions about process and authority. Trump orders a 10% tariff increase on Canadian imports after Ontario ad controversy. Why it matters: sudden tariff hike risks retaliation, heightens U.S.-Canada trade tension, and could hit cross-border supply chains quickly. USTR launches a probe into China's compliance with the 2020 trade deal. This could trigger retaliatory tariffs or trade measures if the probe finds violations material for exporters and global supply chains. Hungary publicly says it's working on ways to blunt U.S. sanctions on Russian oil firms. This signals potential European fractures in sanction enforcement and possible workarounds that would blunt U.S. policy leverage. U.S. expanded Argentine beef tariff rate quota to 80,000 metric tons, intended to lower U.S. beef prices, but this risks domestic rancher backlash and a political fallout in farm states. FAA warns more flight delays coming as controllers and TSA staff approach missed paychecks. Operational risk for holiday travel and freight. Continued shutdown increases probability of broader travel disruption. Arizona sues the U.S. House to compel the swearing-in of Representative-elect Adelita Grijalva. Constitutional and representation fight that could alter House arithmetic and accelerate related partisan legal strategies. U.S.-Thailand Trade Framework Agreement. The U.S. and Thailand announced a joint framework trade agreement. The U.S. will maintain a 19% tariff on Thai products initially, but will identify some products for tariff reduction or elimination. Thailand, in turn, agreed to remove tariff barriers on roughly 99% of U.S. industrial food and agricultural exports, and to address export barriers for U.S.-made vehicles. This marks a shift toward new trade partnerships outside the U.S.-China axis, reflecting a diversification of U.S. trade strategy. For U.S. exporters, it opens access to a key Southeast Asian market, and for supply chains, it signals alternative routing. U.S.-China preliminary consensus in Kuala Lumpur talks. Chinese trade negotiator Li Shenggang said a preliminary consensus was reached with U.S. officials during talks in Kuala Lumpur, covering issues like export controls, rare earths, trade, truce extension, and possibly U.S. agricultural access to China. A potential de-escalation of U.S.-China trade tensions, especially threats of 100% tariffs on Chinese goods, reduces tail risk for global supply chains, U.S. exporters, and firms vulnerable to Chinese restrictions. I have just chaotic things happening around me right now, and I've had a little bit of a cough. Key risks: the consensus lacks detail. China did not provide clear readouts. Implementation may falter, and U.S. firms remain exposed if China reintroduces export curbs. Markets may interpret the consensus prematurely as a full deal, which increases upside-downside volatility risk. Business activity improves, but sentiment weakens. According to the S&P Global's Flash PMI, U.S. business activity climbed in October to 54.8 from 53.9, indicating expansion. However, business sentiment declined, with firms citing inventory accumulation, export weakness, and policy uncertainty as headwinds. The positive PMI reading suggests the U.S. economy may be more resilient than expected and supports near-term growth. However, the weakened sentiment signals latent risks. Firms may pull back investment, hiring, or production if policy remains opaque. If sentiment continues to fall, the expansion may falter. The data blackout due to the shutdown means visibility is limited and surprises may emerge. Cost of living worries haunt Americans ahead of midterms. A Reuters Ipsos poll found that 40% of U.S. adults cited cost of living, food, healthcare, housing, energy as the single most important issue ahead of protecting democracy or immigration. Healthcare costs topped the list of expense concerns. Consumer sentiment and spending are critical for growth in the U.S. economy. If low and middle income households feels squeezed, discretionary spending may falter, leading to slower growth. Politically, this influences election outcomes and thus policy risk. Key risks: rising costs could dampen consumer demand, increase default risk among vulnerable households, and raise pressure on Congress for relief measures, possibly leading to inflationary policy responses. Government shutdown halts key economic data releases. The White House announced that due to the ongoing government shutdown, the Bureau of Labor Statistics will likely not publish October inflation data (CPI) next month, the first such break in more than a century. Reliable economic data is central for business planning, investor decisions, and policy making, especially by the Federal Reserve. The data gap creates uncertainty and increases the risk of policy missteps or surprise shocks. Without key inflation, employment, and other data, markets may misprice risk. The Fed may act on incomplete information. Consumer and business sentiment may deteriorate due to lack of clarity. Government shutdown inflicting economic growth drag. Reuters reported that about 700,000 federal workers have been furloughed, with nearly another 700,000 working without pay. Economists estimate the shutdown is shaving 0.1 to 0.2 percentage points off annualized GDP growth each week. States like New York and Texas face food benefit delays. Direct wage loss to millions, deferred spending, contractor contract suspensions, and federal disruptions pose near-term drag on growth, especially consumer spending and local government activity. Prolonged shutdown could spill into 2026 growth estimates, increase unemployment in affected zones, hit local economies reliant on federal contracts, and reduce consumer confidence further. High farm debt levels amid weak export demand. U.S. farmers face record debt levels exacerbated by a collapse in key export markets, notably China's soybean purchases, and plentiful harvests that push down domestic prices. Agriculture supports rural economies, bank loans, equipment manufacturers, and supply chains. Multi-year debt stress can spill over into banking, local tax bases, and regional economic health. Loan defaults in farm sectors can ripple into regional banks. Investment in equipment and land may decline. Social toll in rural communities may increase, weakening aggregate demand. On one hand, there are positive signals. The business activity rebound, U.S.-Thailand deal preliminary, and U.S.-China truce. On the other hand, substantial risks loom. The data vacuum from the shutdown, cost of living pressures, farm sector weakness, and trade policy uncertainty. For policymakers and markets, the central tension is how resilient the economy proves in the face of policy uncertainty, and whether the positives outweigh the growing operational drag from shutdown and global supply chain issues. Because visibility is reduced, volatility risk is elevated. Investors and companies may assume good news until interrupted, but if a negative surprise hits while data is scarce, the impact will be amplified. Top U.S. and Chinese officials met on the sidelines of the ASEAN summit in Kuala Lumpur and sketched out a trade deal framework. The agreement would pause impending 100% U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods starting November 1st and defer China's planned rare earth minerals export licensing regime by 1 year. U.S. officials say China also committed to resuming purchases of U.S. soybeans. The deal could ease immediate trade tensions, restore export flows, especially agricultural and mineral, and reduce uncertainty for supply chains. However, Chinese side remains circumspect, so execution risk is elevated. President Trump announced a fresh 10% tariff hike on Canadian imports, citing an Ontario provincial advertising campaign during the World Series as fraudulent and a hostile trade act. Officials noted that most Canadian exports to the U.S. are USMCA exempt, so the direct commodity impact is unclear. This signals a sharp escalation in U.S.-Canada trade friction, has implications for cross-border supply chains, autos, energy, forestry, and may invite Canadian retaliation or renegotiation of trade terms. Consumer Price Index shows cooling inflation. The U.S. CPI rose by 0.3% in September, down from 0.4% in August. Year-on-year CPI rose 0%. Core inflation, excluding food and energy, rose 0.2%. Items of note, gasoline rose 4.1% monthly. Burgering food inflation, beef prices surged 14.7% year on year. Coffee fell 0.1%. Moderating inflation gives the Federal Reserve more room to cut rates, but labor market and data vacuum risks remain. The shutdown has delayed some data collection, causing increased uncertainty. The S&P Global Flash Composite PMI rose to 54.8 in October from 53.9 in September, indicating expansion in U.S. business activity, driven mostly by services. However, business sentiment has deteriorated markedly, with companies citing policy uncertainty, especially tariffs and unsold inventories. While output is improving, future hiring and investment may be constrained by declining confidence. The mixed signal expanding activity but weak sentiment is a risk for stability of growth. The U.S. federal government's shutdown, now in its third week, is estimated to reduce GDP growth by 0.1 to 0.2 percentage points per week. Roughly 700,000 federal workers are furloughed and nearly as many working without pay. States warn that food stamp and benefit payments could be affected if the shutdown continues. The shutdown is a clear drag on consumer spending, household finances, and infrastructure and contract flows. A prolonged shutdown raises risk of more serious economic damage. U.S. dollar strengthens ahead of Fed and trade events. The U.S. dollar rose to a 2-week high against the Japanese yen as global markets anticipated a major trade negotiations, U.S. and China, and a likely Fed interest rate cut. The DXY index was around 98.94, with U.S. dollar versus Japan dollar at the Japanese yen, I think is what it is. Yeah, yen. At about 153.12. A firm dollar makes U.S. exports more expensive, which could weigh on trade-sensitive sectors. It also signals investor confidence in U.S. policy, or alternatively reflects safe haven flows amid policy uncertainty. Yeah, safe haven flows amid policy uncertainty. Crude oil prices climbed. Brent up 0.7%, about $66.40 a barrel. WTI up 0.75% at about $61.96 a barrel. So last I saw, at the peak high that I have seen in the time that I've been reporting, Brent was at 67. So the reduction in cost of oil is about to just completely be gone very soon here. Not sure if that's market manipulation or not, but it is losing the traction that would have improved gas prices for consumers. That is getting worse. After U.S.-China trade deal framework eased concerns about global growth and supply constraints, including new sanctions on Russia. Higher oil prices feed into inflation, raise input costs for business and consumers, and pose trade-off for the Fed, higher inflation versus weaker growth. U.S.-China rare earths and supply chain risk. As part of the trade talks, the U.S. raised flags that China's export control regime on rare earth minerals, key to technology, renewable energy, and defense, could force a global decoupling. U.S. officials say their framework would ease those controls and protect supply chains. Rare earths are critical inputs for modern industries, EVs, defense, and renewables. Supply chain disruption or decoupling would raise input cost risk, disrupt manufacturing, and shift global industrial alignments. Taken together, these items highlight a U.S. economy that is holding up in the short run, positive PMI, moderating inflation, but faces significant policy and external risks, shutdown, trade and tariff uncertainty, supply chain fragility, commodity inflation. Key near-term risks include prolonged government shutdown dragging consumer spending and infrastructure output, U.S.-China trade and rare earth dynamics disrupting exports and manufacturing, tariff escalation with Canada and elsewhere raising supply chain cost and business uncertainty, rising oil and commodity prices feeding into inflation just as the Fed considers rate moves, a stronger dollar creating export headwinds while business sentiment weakens. The next few weeks will be critical. The trade deal signing, the Fed's rate decision, and resolution or extension of the shutdown will steer whether this plateau strengthens or turns to a downturn. And remember, kids, the stock market is not the economy. Just because the S&P 500 or Dow Jones might be performing does not mean that wages are growing, jobs are secure, inflation is under control, or that people are thriving. Here's the upcoming hazardous weather outlook for the next few days. Northeast and Great Lakes, no widespread severe weather alerts. Currently showing in reporting sources, some localized cooler nights and early morning frost potential are possible in parts of northern New England and the interior Great Lakes, but not flagged as a major hazard. Watch for lake effect wind gusts along the Great Lakes shorelines if pockets of colder air arrive later in the week. Southeast dry conditions and elevated winds persist across parts of Georgia and the Carolinas. Fire weather risk is flagged. Dry fuels plus gusty wind could support quicker fire spread in grassy wooded areas. No major thunderstorm or flood watch is currently posted, but because fuel dryness remains high, fire weather remains a near-term risk. In the Texas Panhandle for the central and southern plains, as well as Midwest and adjacent regions, reporting shows a forecast for potential severe thunderstorms and hail up to 1.5 inches with gusts of up to 60 miles per hour. The risk is described as low to moderate, 1 out of 5, but enough to warrant local monitoring. Flash flood concerns in eastern portions of the Panhandle with rainfall up to 1.5 to 3.5 possible in the eastern Panhandle. That's inches over the next couple days. Outside of that zone, the plains are not currently under large-scale tornado or multi-state outbreak risk. West Coast and Intermountain West for the mountain zones of Colorado and Utah, snow and rain expected at higher elevations. Valleys may receive rain. Wind and mountain snow hazards may impact passes and travel. The Pacific Northwest and coastal zones, no major hazard currently flagged in the next 24 to 48 hours per public reporting, but moisture and winds increase midweek, worth staying alert. In the desert Southwest, ongoing dryness and elevated fire weather risk remain, though no large fire weather warning was explicitly noted in the last day's reporting. And here are the top international news highlights for the past 24 hours. Venezuela condemns military provocation by the CIA and Trinidad and Tobago. Venezuela accused the U.S. and Trinidad and Tobago of coordinating a false flag military operation aimed at provoking confrontation. U.S. and China reach framework deal on rare earths and tariff pause ahead of Trump and Xi Jinping meeting. That's the leader of China. Top U.S. and Chinese officials in Kuala Lumpur agreed on a framework that would pause U.S. threats of 100% tariffs on Chinese goods and delay China's rare earth export curbs for a year. Donald Trump signs trade and critical minerals deals with Southeast Asia during his Asian tour. The U.S. struck agreements with Thailand, Malaysia, Cambodia, and Vietnam on trade and supply chain access to critical minerals, part of a strategy to reduce dependence on China. Suspects in the Louvre jewelry heist arrested near Paris. French prosecutors announced arrest of two individuals, one caught at the airport attempting to flee in connection with a major robbery at the Louvre. Kirill Dmitriev, Russia's investment envoy, holds talks with U.S. officials amid sanction pressure. Dmitriev, head of Russia's sovereign fund, said he is negotiating with the U.S. despite recent oil sanctions targeting Russia's energy firms and rising geopolitical tension. U.S. air traffic controller shortages surge as government shutdown drags on. The U.S. Transportation Secretary reported 22 incidents of controller staffing shortages on Saturday and warned of more flight delays and cancellations as a result. Good luck getting to your Thanksgiving dinner if we continue on the path that we are currently on. And let's see, so some additional international stories. We've got a longer than normal report for international news tonight. China reports H-6K bombers flew near Taiwan ahead of Xi Jinping Donald Trump meeting. Spillover raises the risk of heightened U.S. military Air Force readiness in the Taiwan Strait, complicating U.S.-China diplomacy and supply chain risk in Asia. Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva and Trump agree to immediate talks on U.S. tariffs on Brazilian goods. U.S. exporters and companies with Brazil ties face uncertainty, could shift Latin America trade dynamics and supply chain exposure. Argentina's President Javier Milei party wins midterm vote, boosting reform agenda and U.S. investor interest. Improved outlook in Argentina may increase U.S. financial exposure in Latin America, offer new export opportunities, and reduce political risk for U.S. firms there. So they just had their midterms. Donald Trump just gave Argentina a shit ton of money right before the midterms. Is there a coup going on in Argentina? Is Donald Trump participating in a coup? Is Donald Trump using our tax dollars to participate in a coup in Argentina? That's what I want to know when I see this. U.S. dollar hits 2-week high versus Japanese yen as global trade and central bank week begins. Strong dollar pressures U.S. exporters and raises cost of dollar-dominated debt abroad. Could affect inflation and competitiveness. U.S. signals new sanctions on Russia if Moscow does not end the war in Ukraine, urges Europe to ramp up the pressure. Additional sanctions on Russia could raise global energy and commodity prices, impacting U.S. inflation and supply chain risk. China, we already got that one. East Timor, Timor, becomes the 11th member of the Association of the Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN. U.S. supply chain and strategic interests in Southeast Asia could shift. ASEAN gains new dynamics. Trade and diplomatic posture may need adjustments. U.S. and Vietnam agree a trade framework deal in which tariffs remain at 20% for now, with products eyed for future reduction. Vital manufacturers and exporters, any reduction on tariffs or resolution on non-tariff barriers could shift competitive dynamics with China and elsewhere. This is an agreement between U.S. and Vietnam to reduce tariffs. U.S. Treasury, not good. I mean, it's 20%. U.S. Treasury Secretary vows no taxpayer losses from a $20 billion swap line deal with Argentina. It was actually $40 billion, if I'm not mistaken. Ahead of its midterm elections, very questionable. Signals active U.S. economic intervention in Latin America, affects risk perceptions. Sounds like bribery to me. U.S. exposure to emerging market debt and electoral outcomes in the region. Yeah, bribery, corruption, a coup. Brazil and U.S. agree to hold immediate talks to resolve escalated tariffs after a meeting between President Trump and Lula. Potential relief for U.S. exporters impacted by Brazilian retaliation, but also underscores trade policy volatility and Latin American commercial risk. Notice that there's not really been any wins on the tariffs. Donald Trump introduces tariffs, countries retaliate, Donald Trump reduces tariffs. That's how this is going with the tariffs right now. Other than that, this shit that he's doing with the tariffs, especially with China, runs the risk of destabilizing global economics. A possible 7% loss to global GDP as a result of Donald Trump's dumbass fucking tariffs tirade that he apparently is achieving nothing in, because he just pissed off China and they're like, fine, no rare earths, and he's like, oh no, I need rare earths, we need to talk. Well, why'd you piss off China then? If China is providing rare earths that are used for national defense here in America, why'd you piss them off? Dumbass. Here are additional 5 lower visibility international developments. The IMF, International Monetary Fund, sees the Middle East and North Asia, MENA, region's 2025 growth at 3.3%, but warns that risk remains tilted to the downside. Economic weakness in the region may increase instability, raising U.S. geopolitical risks, aid burdens, and energy and commodity price exposure. African Development Bank, National Bank, heads say U.S. foreign aid cuts via United States Agency for International Development had severe impact on Somalia's economy and tax revenues. Reduced aid weakens stability in vulnerable regions, may force higher U.S. involvement or increase migration or refugee risk and U.S. counterterrorism burden. IMF warns of elevated domestic borrowing risk in sub-Saharan Africa. Domestic banks holding increasing sovereign debt builds a feedback loop. Financial contagion risk may arise, affecting U.S. investors, aid commitments, and multilateral exposure to developing economy shocks. U.S. stops the key trade initiative, African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, duty-free program with Africa, putting exports and jobs at risk. This reduces trade linkage with Africa, limiting U.S. influence, may push African states toward alternative, e.g. Chinese, trade partners, altering global supply chains. Now, anybody who has been here with me from day one, I have said over and over and over and over and over again, it certainly appears to me that Donald Trump is attempting to bankrupt the United States to assist BRICS in becoming the global power. I do watch economics, have been my entire life. It is something that I care about and find interesting. And Africa has been a place of large investor intrigue, as a place for great opportunity. This week, the United States is obviously pissing off the Africans and they're running to the Chinese. He's pissed off the Canadians and they're running to the Chinese. So while Donald Trump is claiming to be tough on China, he is encouraging global investment markets to invest in China by pissing everybody off with his tariffs. Probably intentional, I would assume. Just because, for me personally, I'm pretty sure he's trying to help BRICS bankrupt the United States. I'm pretty sure that's what the goal is here. That's my opinion. It's what I think. That's what I think is going on. So, I notice this slight that's going on with people being pushed towards China. It's not unnoticeable. I swear to God, I seen a bug go like running up the side of like my fish tank. It looked like a big ass spider. Like I was looking at my cam. We do not have like roaches or anything. I think that might have been a spider or something. I don't know. We live near wetlands. And I've noticed that spider activity in the house has increased, which means that they're killing a lot of bugs. There's been flies in the house. We're also close to a feedlot, so. Let's see. Yeah, so there's that crap with Africa. U.S. President's trip to Asia begins with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN Summit. U.S. signals optimism about a China deal and deeper Southeast Asia ties. This broadens U.S. trade and strategic focus in Asia beyond China, which may shift supply chains and could reshape U.S. export or investment opportunities in the Southeast Asia region. On October 26, 2025, Russia... Oh, wait, hold up. Okay, that's a separate line item. Real quick, I'm just going to stop again and take another moment to talk about Africa. There has been a lot of talk about Africa needing to be a place to invest in. It means that investors are aiming for Africa as a place to make money. And the fact that Donald Trump is pulling the United States out of that effort is going to give foreign investors a advantage, because it is a huge target area for economic development right now. I'm just concerned that this whole thing of pissing off Africa is intentional. Other than that, like I said, it's an area that is being targeted globally right now for economic development. It is considered to be an investment opportunity. So the fact that Donald Trump is letting other people gun for that and pulling the United States out of that, it's just taking away economic opportunity from the United States and giving it to someone else. I don't get it. I mean, there are people who are going to be developing over there, and we should definitely be paying attention to that. I'm going to add that to my notes. Alright, I will try to make an effort to be checking on that consistently. Other than that, something I find incredibly concerning, Russia today conducted a significant missile and drone assault on Ukraine, resulting in civilian casualties. There's some questionable weapons involved in this. Sorry, I'm just making sure I got everything right here. At least 3 individuals were killed and approximately 29 others, including 7 children, were wounded in Kiev over an overnight attack. The assault caused fires in non-residential buildings, and debris from intercepted missiles fell on open areas, damaging nearby structures. Here's the thing that we need to be paying attention to, that I'm paying attention to right now, that I find concerning about what Putin's sorry ass is doing. Missile test announcement in a related development. Putin, you know, people are talking about, is Donald Trump building a bunker under the White House? Is he gonna be all sneaking around like a rat if we get a different president? Is he all gonna be sneaking into the White House and shit? Is he building a nuclear bunker under that stupid ass ballroom? What the fuck is going on with this shit? He didn't even get approval. Has anybody, is there any official, has anybody, like, in the government looked at the schematics on this? Anyways, this is a very dangerous weapon that Putin has. President Vladimir Putin announced the successful final test of Russia's nuclear-powered cruise missile. Oh boy, I don't know if I'm going to say it right. Bruvesnik. I don't speak Russian. Bruvesnik. B-U-R-E-V-E-S-T-N-I-K. Brevesnik. Putin claimed that the missile is capable of evading existing defense systems and will soon be deployed to Russia's military forces. The 9M730 Brevesnik, also known as NATO, NATO, reporting name SSC-X-9 Skyfall. What we do know, what analysts say about its dangers, or how and whether it poses a threat to the United States. I have a kitten in my room. Okay, there we're getting too riled up. So this, apparently, from what I'm hearing, this weapon, this nuclear bomb, can fly all the way across the world. The Brevesnik reportedly flew 15 hours, covering approximately 14,000 kilometers, 8,700 miles. Russia describes the missile as nuclear-capable, ground-launched, and importantly, nuclear-powered. The propulsion is said to enable essentially unlimited range, low-altitude flight, loiter capability, and evasion of missile defenses. Well, Trump just shut down like half of our missile defenses when he got in, didn't he? Didn't he fire a bunch of federal employees, including people that were in charge of our national defense systems? Hold up. All right, we hit the brakes. We're going to real quick address the issue of how United States missile defense and nuclear infrastructure is performing right now. There are credible reports of staff furloughs, budget cuts, and funding risks in agencies and programs tied to U.S. missile defense and nuclear infrastructure. The National Nuclear Security Administration, NNSA, which manages the U.S. nuclear weapons stockpile, modernization, non-proliferation, and related critical infrastructure, is reported to be furloughed about 80% of its civilian staff. That is about 1,400 employees. Due to ongoing government shutdown, only 375 are designated as essential. This was reported mid-October 2025. The Missile Defense Agency, MDA, has had flat or reduced budget requests for several years, and internal documents show that capability gaps may emerge. For example, the fiscal year 2025 request was around $10.4 billion, which is lower than the previous year's needs. The U.S. Space Force and related space-based missile warning tracking systems saw proposed cuts to civilian jobs and contract services in August 2025 budget plan. For example, 5,700 civilian jobs were slated for elimination, including support roles for missile warning tracking systems. What this implies: risk to U.S. missile defense, furloughs at NNSA. Although NNSA is not the primary operator of missile defense interceptors, its role in warhead maintenance, modernization, and nuclear infrastructure is adjacent to missile defense. A large furlough, 80%, could delay warhead certificates, modernization schedules, or safety maintenance tasks, which indirectly weakens overall deterrent postures. Budget flattening and cuts to MDA. When budgets are flat or reduced in real, adjusting for inflation, and programs are delayed. Next generation interceptor, for example, it raises risk that the U.S. may lag emerging missile threats, including hypersonic or advanced cruise missiles, or those posed to homeland defense. Civilian job cuts, support cuts in missile warning and tracking. The early detection and tracking layer is critical for missile defense, especially homeland and home theater interceptors. Cuts in civilian positions support services may degrade sustainment or expansion of that layer, reducing responsiveness or system availability. The furloughs at NNSA are tied to the government shutdown. Budget flat does not necessarily mean immediate capability failure. Many programs still receive funding, and some are prioritized. No major verified reporting indicates a complete dissolution of the U.S. missile defense capability. But yes, there are staffing and funding pressures in agencies critical to U.S. missile defense and nuclear infrastructure. While none of the evidence shows that the U.S. missile defense shield is disabled today, the combination of furloughs plus budget flattening plus job cuts increases vulnerability and reduces margins of error. If these trends continue, U.S. missile defense modernization readiness and response may be greater at risk. So then the question becomes, is Russia going to nuke the United States, and is Trump going to let it happen? Is Trump planning for Russia to nuke the United States, and is he preparing for the Russia to nuke the United States? Is he building a bunker under the ballroom at the White House? This is something that people have been discussing. It's just hearsay. I don't fucking know. Did anybody in charge look at the schematics does anybody even know? Did he get these blueprints for this ugly ass ballroom that looks like a shitty ass Minecraft base approved by anyone? Is he building a bunker or secret tunnel passage under the White House? Is he planning on hiding from a nuke? So anyways, Russia is talking about their bomb that has essentially unlimited range, low altitude flight, loader capability, and evasion of missile defenses, which we have depleted missile defenses right now. Oh my goodness. Not good, you know. I mean, is the Hopi prophecy going to happen? Because I really hope it doesn't. The Hopi prophecy essentially says that Donald Trump gets the United States nuked. In my opinion. Low altitude terrain hugging flight, e.g. 550 to 100 meters altitude in some claims, which complicates radar detection. Possible loiter time, state in error for long periods. Thanks to nuclear reactor propulsion, nuclear warhead carriage capability, though specifics of yield, warhead type, guidance, reliability remain opaque. What the dangers are: strategic reach, surprise threat. If fully functional, the missile's range and loitering capacity mean it could approach the U.S. or other adversaries from unexpected directions, low altitude, complicating early warning. This heightens the potential for surprise nuclear strike, especially on hardened targets. Defense evasion, a low-flying, long-loiter cruise missile powered by a nuclear reactor could bypass traditional ballistic missile warning or defense radars, which are optimized for high-altitude ballistic threats that could reduce the reaction time the U.S. has. Nuclear warhead escalation, because the weapon is nuclear capable, its operation and deployment will increase the stakes dramatically. It isn't just a conventional cruise missile, but part of the strategic nuclear arsenal that changes the calculus of deterrence. Environmental and safety risk, because the propulsion system is reportedly a nuclear reactor. There are major concerns about reliability, accident risk, potential radiation release, especially during a flight or crash scenarios. Previous test incidents suggest this is a real hazard. Reliability and operational status. Many Western experts remain skeptical about whether the Burevestnik is truly operational, reliable, and safe. The program has experienced test failures, speed, and vulnerability. Some analysis point out that the missile may be subsonic, lower than hypersonics, and loitering for long periods may make it vulnerable to detection and interception. Targeting and warhead yield uncertainty. While the range is claimed to be effectively unlimited, the actual warhead yield, accuracy, and how it would be used remain unclear. Many observers say it may not add capabilities Russia doesn't already have, e.g. ICBMs, submarine-launched missiles, but rather mixes new risk factors. Defense systems adaptation. The U.S. and allies are aware of the threat and may adjust early warning, sensor coverage, and cruise missile defense planning accordingly. The ability of this missile to completely evade defenses is not universally accepted. Does it present a direct threat to the United States right now? In theoretical terms, yes. If fully deployed with a nuclear warhead, long-range loitering capability, and terrain-hugging flight, it could threaten U.S. territory or assets with little warning. The claimed 14,000-kilometer test range suggests intercontinental reach. In practical and near-term terms, the threat is less certain because of doubts about operational readiness, reliability, and warhead integration. This appears more in the emerging threat category rather than an immediate deployed capability with clear targeting against U.S. cities. Risk profile. It raises the strategic risk of escalation, especially nuclear escalation, complicates deterrence, and increases uncertainty for U.S. defense planners. It may not mean the U.S. should assume the missile will strike imminently, but it should assume the missile may eventually be a realistic capability and plan accordingly. This concludes today's news broadcast. I'm going to go now. I'll see you guys later. Everybody stay safe out there.
So the Olympics is great. And Johnny, for the others, you know, the World Cup, Johnny is the head of it. We had our top people, Wasserman. They all came in on the Olympics, and then I saw Johnny. And we got the World Cup, too. And, you know, it's only because they rigged the election that I'll be your president representing you there. You know, I got both of them. I got the Olympics, and I got the World Cup. And I said, you know, it's too bad. One was in 2026 and the other was in 2028. And I said, I won't be there. I won't be your president. But then they rigged the election and now we won. So I'm going to be your president for the Olympics and for the World Cup. So Johnny, thank you for the World Cup. And everybody, thank you for the Olympics. We're going to have a great time.
Hey guys, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment to my videos. And also, Don't forget to check out my shop where you could get this awesome Real Patriots Punch Nazis t-shirt. America, fuck yeah! And if you go to the link tree in my bio on most platforms, it's got links to everything, all of my stuff. You can find my shop there. I'm on eBay. You can also get this cool Exterminate MAGA sticker, because MAGA's fucking cockroaches. And fuck MAGA. Abolish MAGA. Fuck you, MAGA.